Building a PC in a dual chamber case is a pretty easy process for experienced PC builders, but Lian Li has simplified the process further to make it even easier for novice users to get the pro look. With a new power supply designed specifically for dual chamber and an AIO with hidden tubing. In this video we'll be taking a look at both of these new parts and building a system with them to see what all the fuss is about with the new Lian Li HydroShift LCD AIO and Edge power supply. So the plan with this video is to build a system with the new Lian Li HydroShift LCD AIO and Edge power supply and see how much easier or difficult it is to build in a dual chamber case with these new parts. These are designed specifically to work well with dual chamber cases. The AIO in the top of the case, it will then show less of the tubing, and the power supply has this unique feature of how the power connectors connect to it, designed specifically for dual chamber cases, and it is meant to make the process more simple and easier to access power supply cables once the system is installed. I'll take a quick look at both of these first, run down some of the specs and features of both the AIO and the power supply, then we'll get on with building a system, see what that's like, and then come back with some thoughts at the end. I'll also run this AIO on our current AMD 7950X test system so we can compare performance of this to all the other AIOs that we have in the data pile at the moment. First, we'll take a look at the HydroShift AIO. It's a new 360mm AIO from Lian Li with an LCD screen. It's available in three different versions, the 360TL, the 360R and the 360S. The one we have is the 360S. The difference between them are the fans and the thickness of the radiator. The MSRP price of the 360S is $180 US, or you can pick it up in the UK for around £150 for the 360S version. The 360R is around £170 and the 360TL is about £220. You can pick them all up from Overclockers UK. HydroShift features an innovative tubing design which integrates the tubes against the radiator for an almost tubeless look to deliver a sleek appearance. It uses ribbed tubing which is highly durable and has the flexibility to bend around the radiator without decreasing the inner tube diameter or restricting flow. Tubing can be routed at either side of the radiator and covered by the included left or right hand L-shaped plastic shroud, while the opposite side of the radiator can be covered with the included aluminium plate to enhance aesthetics. HydroShift also includes a 2.88-inch IPS screen with 480 by 480 resolution and 500 nits peak brightness. It can be customized to show themes, system statistics, photos and videos using the Lian Li L-Connect 3 software. The fans come pre-installed to the radiator on the 360S. I believe they do also on the other versions. You may want to swap the orientation if you're running push-pull or something, but the wiring to the fans is pretty neat. However, they're not like the magnetic fans that connect to each other and have electrical connections built in, but they do have these covers on the bottom and the top of the fan which hides the majority of the wiring. The fans are daisy chained to each other and then they break off to this connection here, and it's just a standard 4-pin PWM motherboard header. You can connect the fans into the wiring that goes to the pump and then potentially run the fan speed using the Lian Li L-Connect 3 software. You may want to do that, or you may want to use motherboard software or the BIOS to control the fan speed. The fans have a speed range of 200 to 2500 RPM, maximum airflow of 73.14 cubic feet per minute, maximum pressure of 5 millimeters H2O, and a maximum noise output of 29.8 decibels. They are fluid dynamic bearings. As I say, they have a standard 4-pin PWM header. The radiator on the 360S version is an all aluminium radiator with 20 fins per inch layout. It's a 27mm standard thickness radiator on the 360S version. The TL and the R versions come with a 31mm radiator. Tubing length on the S version is 435mm, slightly longer tubing at 440mm on the other versions. The cold plate at the base of the cooler is microskived copper. The pump speed has a range of 2,200 3,800 to 3,800 RPM, and at the CPU block side, the fittings are 90-degree rotary fittings. The most interesting thing about this cooler, as well as the LCD screen, is when you've got it mounted into the top of your case like that, you're only going to see a small amount of tubing coming down from behind the radiator to the CPU block, because the majority of the tubing is covered by this plastic shroud, which just clips off, and underneath it you can see the tubing enters the radiator on some 90-degree angled rotary fittings. If you want to switch the orientation, so from the factory it comes this way around, so you got it mounted in the top and tubing coming from the right hand side. Potentially you might want to switch it around so the tubing comes from the left. If you do want to do that, then all you need to do is remove the fan and these couple of brackets here, just a couple of screws to take that off, and then you can just switch the tubing to the opposite direction using these rotary fittings. Once you've done that, you just have to fit the alternative plastic shroud, and that'll cover up the tubing, the metal brackets on the other side. And you can also swap round this aluminium trim plate to the opposite side of the radiator to improve the aesthetics. It supports all the latest Intel and AMD desktop platforms, so Intel LGA 1700 and AMD AM4, AM5. Comes with all the mounting hardware for both of those, so you've got an Intel LGA 1700 specific backplate, an alternative upper mounting bracket, comes with spring-loaded screws pre-installed there, so they're fixed to the actual bracket. Couple of brackets for AM4, AM5 mounting. There's also this neat looking plastic shroud which just goes over the top of the mounting screws, and it covers up the screws once it's installed. So again, that's all there to improve the aesthetics of the cooler. And there's a couple of clips for the tubing, so these clip to the tubing, and you can also route some of the cabling up those clips too. The cooler also comes with a small tube of thermal paste and sort of a stencil for applying it to the base of the cooler, and a application tool. There's an additional bracket included for the tubing, so if you want to clip the tubing even further up here, you can add an extra bracket to it. Also included are the mounting screws for mounting the radiator into the case. One thing you need to be aware of with this cooler, even though it is a 360mm radiator, so it's a 3x120 fan mount, your case needs to support a 280mm wide mounting to allow for the additional space that's required for the tubing. On this 360S version, there are a few cables that go to the pump housing. They actually all come down one larger cable, but then they split off to a fan header. There's a SATA power cable, so you'll need a SATA power cable to run it from your power supply. A USB header, so you will need a USB 2 header on the motherboard, and a 4-pin PWM header for the pump speed control.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series, alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
So moving on to the Edge power supply. This is probably one of the most interesting power supplies I've seen in a long time. They're not usually that interesting power supplies. It is literally just a box that provides power to parts of your PC, and they usually work pretty well unless you buy a really cheap and a really poor quality one. But this one is really interesting because you can see the shape is a bit different to a normal power supply. Lian Li has moved the power connectors from the back of the power supply and put them onto this kind of tray that sticks out at the bottom. So when it's installed in the back of your case, instead of plugging into the side, which can be a bit awkward, you can't see what you're plugging into, you plug it in directly to the base of the power supply. So it should make it a little easier for connecting cables once the system's installed and there's all the cables and everything else in the back of the system. And also a really neat feature on this power supply, which I think is excellent, is this USB hub. So the reason you might need this is if you're using several different RGB or fan controllers that need a USB connection and software to work. So a single cable comes from the power supply to a USB header on the motherboard, and then it splits off to 4 USB 2 headers. And like the HydroShift AIO, that requires a USB connection. If you're running some different fans that use a hub that may require another connection, you might start to run out of connectors on the motherboard. You may have to start using adapters. This solves that problem. The Lian Li Edge power supply is available in 1300, 1000 watt and 850 watt versions. All three versions are 80 plus platinum and cybernetics platinum certified, and they all come with a 10-year warranty. You can pick up the Edge 1000 from Overclockers UK, priced at $169.99. The 1300 watt is $204.95 and the 850 version is $129.95. The unique shape of the Edge power supply allows for easy connecting and management of cables in dual chamber PC cases. It's equipped with a built-in USB hub to connect hardware controllers and hide associated wiring. It features integrated industrial grade capacitors to reduce size and cable lengths tailored for use with dual chamber chassis to simplify assembly for first-time users and experienced builders alike. It's also a fully modular power supply, so it comes with cables that can be connected and disconnectors, quite a good bag of cables, 24 pin there. They're all sleeved cables as well, so they're quite nice looking cables. There's a 12 volt high power cable there. It's an ATX 3.1 version, so it's the latest version of the 12 volt high power, and the terminals in here are soldered rather than crimped for additional durability. There's also several SATA power cables and Molex cables. They're the standard type, which are quite long, but it also comes with these shorter cables that are just 300 millimeters long, and the spacing between the SATA power connectors is 15 millimeters. So if you've got devices that are all connected close together, or you just want to minimize the amount of cables, these are ideal for that. There's a USB 2 header cable that connects from the USB hub to the motherboard, and alternatively there's a USB 2 header to a Type A connection, so potentially you can connect this to the power supply USB hub and to a rear USB port if you don't have any spare USB 2 headers on the motherboard. There's also a couple of the usual motherboard EPS power cables on there. Again, these are sleeved and they have the cable combs integrated into them, and you also get 4 PCIe power cables, again sleeved and with integrated cable combs. There's also a PCIe slot cover. I believe that's for running the USB header cable from the hub out the back to a Type A port. You also, with the power supply, get a few white or clear zip ties and screws for mounting it into the case. One other thing to mention is with the 1300 watt version, it also comes with an additional 12 volt high power cable. I believe it's a 2 PCIe to 12 volt high power, so it connects up to 2 PCIes and to a 12 volt high power, as well as the 12 volt high power to 12 volt high power cable. And apparently that's to future proof it in case any future GPUs need 2 12 volt high power connections. Okay, so let's turn our attention to the build and the hardware that I'm going to be using for the build. We know the AIO and the power supply. It's the Lian Li HydroShift AIO and the Edge power supply. The case is the Lian Li 11 Dynamic Evo RGB in white. Extra fans will be the Lian Li Unifan TL120s reverse blade and forward blades, 3 in the bottom, 3 in the side, AIO at the top. Potentially a rear exhaust fan in there too. CPU for the build is the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D. Motherboard is the X670E Aorus Pro X from Gigabyte, white motherboard with white PCB. Graphics card is the Inno3D RTX 4080 Super X3 OC white to match the aesthetics of the rest of the system. And then for the SSD, it's a Seagate Firecuda 530. It's a 2TB drive, but it's only PCIe Gen 4, that's all we need really for this test system. NVMe M.2 SSD. And then for memory, it's 64GB of G.Skill Ripjaws M5 RGB 2x32GB modules, and it's DDR5 6400 mega transfers per second. That's pretty much all the hardware for the build. Let's get on with building the system. Sit back and relax, watch this time lapse of the build, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think of how the system is to build with these new Lian Li parts. So system's built, everything's up and running, it's working as it should be. AIO radiator mounted at the top, 3 intake fans at the bottom, 3 intake fans at the side, and then a exhaust fan at the rear. The AIOs also working as exhaust. I think both the AIO and the Edge power supply really smarten up how the system looks. I think around this side in the main compartment, the lack of tubing or the less tubing that you see in here is good for the aesthetics. It would work even better probably with a back connect motherboard like a MSI Project Zero motherboard. And in the second compartment where the power supply and all the wiring is, again, that looks really neat and tidy. The length of these cables designed for dual chamber helps with that. I wouldn't say it's a game changer as such, the power supply. Usually when I'm installing from the start, I have all the cables connected up to the power supply first, then install it into the system. But if you do want to disconnect or reconnect new cables to the power supply while it's installed, it definitely helps with the cable connectors pointing out towards that right hand side of the system. The USB hub, I really like that design. It's great if you're running out of USB 2 headers on the motherboard, need additional headers, or if you just want to make it look as neat and tidy as possible in this main chamber. You only need to then run one USB 2 header cable to the motherboard, so that will neaten things up slightly. You don't see it as such down at the bottom here, but it depends how you have this case configured. You can lift the motherboard up higher. Potentially you can see then the bottom of the motherboard. It would help with that. Another thing I like about the power supply is that 12 volt high power cable with the blue end. So when you actually insert it into the graphics card connector socket, you get a really good visual reference of whether the connector is fully inserted in there. So if you see any blue still sticking out, you know you're not going in correctly and it needs pushing in further. Potentially that could help with any bad installation and potentially any issues with connectors melting, etc. Who knows, but I do like that proper visual reference that you get from that. One thing to mention about the AIO cooler, because the tubes kind of wrap around the radiator and where they come out to the CPU block, it is quite tight maneuvering the CPU block into position and getting it in place for the screws, the mounting screws, to align with the standoffs or the back plate. Because of that, I noticed a bit of an issue with this one. I don't know whether it happened during the installation or whether it had already happened previously, but the actual LCD cap over the CPU block, it seems loose, and it actually turned out that one of the little plastic clips had broken off of that, so it does wobble about. Maybe that did happen during the installation, trying to move it into position, but potentially could be a bit of a design flaw that it does hold on with just one of the clips. There is only 2 clips that hold it to the actual CPU block. It does just hold on there in place, but it is a bit wobbly with one missing. So definitely something to watch out for when you're installing the CPU block. Just try and be careful not to be too forceful with it to get it into position. As well as looking at the aesthetics, I did want to see how this HydroShift 360S cooler did perform. So I have run the usual thermal performance tests that I would do on a standalone CPU cooler review using the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X test system. With the fans at maximum RPM, the cooler is a bit on the loud side at 50 decibels, which puts it in mid-table when compared with previously tested AIOs. Thermal performance at max fan speed is similar to other 360mm AIOs at 66 degrees C above ambient. The temperature is okay, but a few degrees off the absolute best in terms of raw thermal performance. Reducing fan speed to 40 decibels noise output drops performance of the HydroShift a little compared with some other 360mm units, but it's still only 6 degrees C off the best. With PBO enabled on the 7950X, the HydroShift S360 does a decent job holding on to an average clock multiplier of 51.4 times while cooling 200 watts package power, which isn't bad at all. So the thermal performance of the HydroShift 360S, it's okay, but if your system is all about the looks, then I'd say the HydroShift 360S or the other HydroShift coolers would be a worthy purchase. And the Edge power supplies, they do make things a little more easy when it comes to connecting cables after installing or doing the initial install of the system. And the USB hub, that does seem like a really smart idea. And also those shorter SATA power cables, it's again another thing that neatens up the cable management and just the overall appearance and the professional look you get using this power supply that you probably won't get from anything else. So that's the Lian Li HydroShift LCD 360S AIO and Edge 1000 power supply. Let me know what you think of both of these bits of hardware in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. and subscribe to Kit Guru on YouTube if you've not already done so. If you enjoy what we do here at Kit Guru and you want to help support us, you can always head over to our store and pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, for all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to our website.